Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. The first time Winter met Shadrach, he was wearing a faded black t-shirt, the kind that clung a little too tightly around the arms, and spoke like someone who knew how to get into a person's head. He wasn't loud. He didn't flash money or talk like he had the world figured out. He just listened when she spoke, really listened. She remembered that clearly because not many people ever did. He would tilt his head, let her finish her sentences, and nod like her words mattered. Back then, that was all it took. Winter was used to being admired, envied even. After all, she came from wealth, but she had never really been seen. Not like that. Shadrach's attention had felt refreshing, like stepping into a warm room after a long, cold walk. Her friends had warned her. Her mother had frowned. Her father had given a careful, tired sigh when she introduced him. But none of it mattered. Winter had made her choice, and in her heart, she believed love could fix everything: backgrounds, behavior, ambition, even broken men. Marriage, however, was not what she expected it to be. Within the first 6 months, the shimmer wore off, replaced by quiet, steady cracks in the foundation. Shadrach rarely had a stable income, but Winter didn't mind. She had her father's business to manage, and more than enough money to carry them both. At first, she thought she was doing what a good wife should, supporting her husband, believing in him. She would hand him cash whenever he asked, sometimes without knowing what it was for. A car repair, a business idea, rent for a friend, late-night emergencies she didn't question. She worked long hours, juggling contracts and logistics, making sure the staff at her father's logistics firm delivered well. She came home exhausted, yet still prepared dinner, kissed her son goodnight, and tried to hold together a version of love she no longer recognized. Shadrach, meanwhile, began to shift. His compliments disappeared. His smile became distant. And slowly, his nights out increased. He started wearing new clothes, tighter, shinier. He wore cologne she hadn't bought and came home smelling of sweat and unfamiliar perfume. When she asked, he always had a quick, sharp response. "Don't start. I work hard too." She never saw that work. Despite everything, Winter still clung to the idea that what they had was real. She told herself every relationship had ups and downs. Some evenings, she would sit at the edge of their bed, watching Shadrach scroll through his phone, a faint grin tugging at his lips. She wouldn't ask what he was smiling at. She would just look at him and try to remember why she fell in love. It became harder with each passing day. Their only true joy was their son, bright-eyed, full of laughter, untouched by the silence that now filled their home. Winter started to live for the little moments, brushing her son's hair in the morning, hearing him call her mummy with sticky fingers and half-finished sentences, the way he hugged her tightly before school. Those moments reminded her she still had something good. But even then, at the back of her mind, she knew something wasn't right. She wasn't blind. She was just tired of hoping, tired of pretending, tired of being the only one still fighting for what felt more like duty than love. The insult came quietly, tucked into a pause between 2 bites of yam porridge. Shadrach had barely looked up from his phone when he said it. "You're getting fat, Winter. You should do something about it. Maybe hit the gym or something." There was no emotion in his voice, no concern, not even irritation. It was a statement, said as casually as one would comment on the weather. Winter froze, spoon halfway to her mouth. Her first instinct wasn't hurt. It was confusion. The way he said it, like her body was an inconvenience, like he had just noticed she was no longer what he wanted. She dropped the spoon slowly into her plate and swallowed hard. Shadrach didn't look up. He kept scrolling, one leg crossed over the other, a half-smirk playing on his lips, as if the world beyond his screen was far more interesting than his wife sitting across from him. That night, she stood in front of her bedroom mirror longer than usual. The light was dim, flickering slightly. One of the bulbs above the dresser had blown out weeks ago and hadn't been replaced. She had gotten used to living with half-light. It almost felt like it matched her life. She let her silk nightgown fall to the floor, leaving her in just her skin, bare and exposed. Her eyes moved slowly, tracing every curve, every fold. She turned slightly, then forward again. She wasn't the woman she had been at 23, but she wasn't unrecognizable either. Her body had changed, softer, fuller, shaped by childbirth and years of stress, but it was still her body. The one that had carried life, that had stayed strong through sleepless nights and early mornings, through heartbreak and hustle. And yet a part of her wondered, was it true? Had she let herself go? Was she no longer enough for the man she married? Those thoughts whispered around her like shadows, making her question not just her weight, but her worth. She wrapped her arms around herself and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the silence, trying to remember the last time she had felt truly beautiful. In the days that followed, Shadrach's comment became a seed, and every passing glance from him watered it. He didn't stop at that one remark. Whenever they argued, no matter how trivial, he found a way to return to it. Maybe if you took better care of yourself, I'd enjoy coming home. No man wants a woman who's twice his size. You used to look different before the wedding. Winter started to keep quiet during those moments, afraid that if she opened her mouth, the tears would come. At work, she smiled and handled contracts like a pro, but inside, she was crumbling. Still, she made a decision, not out of desperation to win Shadrach back, but because she needed to feel like herself again. She didn't tell him. She didn't denounce it. One morning, she rose before dawn, pulled out a pair of leggings she hadn't worn in years, tied her hair into a puff, and stepped into the gym near her office. It smelled of rubber mats and determination. That was where she met Lucky. She didn't speak to him at first. He was just the quiet, serious-looking instructor who nodded when she arrived and left her to figure things out. But something about the way he carried himself, focused, steady, kind, caught her attention. And without meaning to, Winter began to wonder what it felt like to be seen again, not as a body to criticize, but as a woman worth noticing. Lucky didn't speak much at the gym. He was the kind of person who moved with quiet precision, never rushing, never lingering. His routine was clockwork. He arrived early, set up the day's equipment, guided clients through workouts, and packed up without a fuss. But when he was alone, after the music stopped and the sweat-drenched mats had been rolled away, he often sat at the edge of the bench press and just stared at the ceiling. Those were the moments no one ever saw, the pieces of himself he tucked away under strength and silence. Behind the lean muscle and focus stare was a young man carrying too much for someone his age. At 29, Lucky had dreams that were bigger than his circumstances. He wanted to open his own gym someday, one with real equipment, proper staff, and a little smoothie bar in the corner. But dreams, he'd learned, were expensive, and his heart was already stretched thin by something more pressing, Cherish. Cherish wasn't just his girlfriend, she was his priority. From the moment she'd cried in his arms about her mother's illness, Lucky had felt it was his duty to protect her. He hadn't grown up with much, so he understood what it meant to struggle. When Cherish told him her mother was battling cancer, it shook him. He'd seen the weight in her eyes, the tremble in her voice. She said they couldn't afford chemotherapy and had already sold most of their belongings. Lucky hadn't thought twice. He started putting aside half of his monthly earnings, even skipped meals some weeks just to gather enough. He paid for drugs, scans, and hospital bills, all through Cherish. Whenever she asked for more, claiming a sudden emergency or a test result, he would dig deeper. Some of his clients, especially the older ones, noticed the toll. His smile thinned, his eyes dimmed, but he always showed up, always worked. No one knew that behind his composed exterior, he was breaking. The truth came on a Tuesday afternoon, a day like any other until it wasn't. Lucky had finished his shift early and decided to check on Cherish, unannounced. He hadn't seen her mother in weeks. When he arrived at her compound in Surulere, the gate was open. Inside, laughter spilled from the back veranda. And there she was, Cherish's mother, healthy, vibrant, sipping malt, and gossiping with neighbors like someone who had never seen a hospital bed. Lucky stood frozen. Then Cherish walked out, paused, and her face fell, not with guilt, but surprise. "You didn't tell me you were coming," she muttered. Before he could speak, a young man, her brother, appeared from behind her, grinning. "Oma, so you really believed all that cancer story?" he laughed. "Guy, nah, your money we use plan our japa. Cherish no get time for all this loyalty rubbish." Lucky felt the world go silent. Cherish didn't deny it. She didn't even flinch. She just crossed her arms and looked away. That moment, like a blunt knife, carved a wound deeper than any betrayal he'd known. He turned without a word, walked away from the compound, and never looked back. But something inside him stayed behind, that quiet part of himself that still wanted to believe people could be good. The gym felt heavier when Lucky returned the next morning. Not the equipment. Those remained neatly arranged, lined with steel resolve, but the air itself seemed denser, weighed down by his silence. He moved slower, spoke less, and offered only brief nods when greeted by the regulars. His usual focus was there, but the light behind it had dimmed. Winter noticed it right away. From the treadmill, she watched him as he adjusted dumbbells with no real interest, his face blank, lips pressed in a line like he was holding something in. She hadn't planned to say anything, but by the time her session was over, she found herself lingering by the water dispenser, clutching her bottle tighter than necessary. "You okay?" Lucky hesitated. Then, like someone unlocking a door he didn't know was open, he sat down on the nearest bench and dropped his head into his palms. She didn't press him, just waited. Eventually, through a voice that cracked once or twice, he told her everything about Cherish, the lies, the betrayal, and the shame that came with being fooled by someone he trusted completely. Winter listened, stunned by the honesty in his voice. Not just the pain, but the way he spoke without trying to soften it. He wasn't angry, not outwardly. He wasn't shouting or swearing or blaming the world. He was simply broken, sitting in his hurt like a man who'd finally run out of ways to fix it. And somehow, that made it worse. It reminded Winter of how it felt to sleep beside someone you once loved and feel like a stranger in your own marriage. She didn't speak for a while. Instead, she sat beside him and rested her hand gently on his shoulder. It was a small gesture, but the weight of it made Lucky look up. Their eyes met, hers filled with quiet understanding, his still red-rimmed and tired. For a brief second, they weren't trainer and client. They weren't two broken people trying to piece themselves back together. They were just human, held together by silence that said more than words could. After that day, their interactions began to shift. Nothing dramatic. No confessions, no romantic hints. Just small things, slightly longer conversations, shared smiles, a knowing glance when the room grew loud. Lucky began to laugh again, not often, but genuinely. Winter noticed how he opened up around her, how his jokes became a little lighter, his instructions more personal. She didn't expect it, but she found herself looking forward to their sessions, not because of the workouts, but because for the first time in a long while, she felt seen without judgment. It wasn't love. Not yet, but it was something softer. Something like trust. And in a life where love had become heavy and exhausting, that softness was enough to keep her coming back. Not just to the gym, but to herself. Winter started arriving at the gym a little earlier each day, not because she needed more time to exercise, but because she craved the calm it brought. The gym had become a place where she could hear herself think, away from the sharp edges of her home life. At first, her presence was subtle, stretching quietly in the corner, headphones in, focused on the rhythm of her breathing. But over time, her silence evolved into something more open. She would pass a casual comment on the weather, then stay after her session to ask Lucky about a routine. The way he responded, patient, without expectation, made her feel grounded. They began to develop a rhythm of their own, one that didn't require explanations. Winter didn't have to pretend around him. She didn't have to smile when she was tired or carry the weight of being strong all the time. Lucky seemed to understand without asking. At home, the distance between her and Shadrach widened like a slow crack in glass. Conversations turned into dry exchanges about their son, bills, or grocery lists. When he wasn't out late, he was asleep on the couch with his phone pressed to his chest, locked always. Winter stopped checking. She stopped asking where he went or who he was with, but her withdrawal didn't go unnoticed. One night he accused her of being cold, of no longer caring. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and realized that the man she once loved had become a stranger with the same face. She didn't argue. Instead, she nodded and excused herself, shutting the door gently behind her. Alone in the bathroom, she stared at her reflection and whispered, "I'm tired." It wasn't a cry for help, just a truth that had been buried too long. She began writing more in her journal. Short entries, fragments of her emotions, little sentences she didn't have the courage to speak aloud. He doesn't see me anymore. I miss feeling important. I don't know if I still love him. It was during one of her sessions with Lucky that he gently mentioned he'd noticed she seemed distracted. She hesitated, then laughed lightly, brushing it off. But he didn't laugh back. He just said, "You can talk to me. You don't have to pretend here." And for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to exhale. She didn't tell him everything, not yet, but something about the way he listened made her feel like she could. Their bond wasn't loud or obvious, but it was real, rooted in shared hurt, quiet respect, and the rare comfort of being understood. Winter found herself thinking about him outside the gym, wondering what he did after closing hours, how he spent his Sundays. She didn't call it attraction. Not yet. It was too soon, too complicated. But in the silence of her heart, something was shifting, gently, steadily, like the first pull of a tide she hadn't realized she was already standing in. The house was still that night, one of those rare evenings when not even the generator hummed in the background. Outside, a soft wind rattled the palm fronds, and Winter could hear the distant barking of a dog, the low murmur of a passing car. Shadrach was asleep on the left side of the bed, one arm thrown over his head, his breathing deep and uneven. She wasn't trying to snoop. She'd given up on that long ago. But when his phone buzzed beside him and the screen lit up, curiosity overpowered restraint. Winter turned her head slowly, her breath shallow, and reached for the phone. No password. Just a single message on the lock screen. "Don't forget the 200K you promised me. I'll be waiting, baby. Love you." Her thumb hovered, trembling, over the screen. She didn't open the thread. She didn't need to. The message was enough. Clear, bold, final. She sat back, the phone still in her hand, the weight of it suddenly unbearable. The room felt smaller, colder, not because of the message itself, she had suspected for a long time, but because of how empty she felt reading it. There were no tears, no rage, just a quiet realization that whatever remained between them had long slipped away. Her eyes moved to Shadrach, his chest rising and falling peacefully beside her, oblivious to the shattering silence now sitting between them. She placed the phone gently back on the table, then rose and walked out to the sitting room. The tiles were cold under her feet. She curled up on the couch, hugging a throw pillow tightly against her chest. That night, Winter didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling until the first hints of dawn crept in through the windows, her mind tracing over the years she'd spent loving a man who never once held her heart the way she held his. By morning, she was changed, not in appearance, not in speech, but in something quieter, something inward. She moved through the house with calm purpose, preparing her son's school bag, fixing breakfast, and responding to work emails, but everything felt distant. Her gestures were routine, but her heart was now elsewhere. That evening, she saw Lucky at the gym. He greeted her with his usual nod, but there was a gentleness in his eyes she hadn't noticed before. During her workout, she stumbled slightly while adjusting weights, and his hand steadied her from behind. Their eyes met only briefly, and for a split second, neither of them moved. Winter stepped away quickly, her pulse skipping. She told herself it meant nothing, that she was just tired, overwhelmed. But as the days passed, her thoughts returned to that look, to the quietness in his presence, to the warmth his nearness offered. It was wrong. She was married, but the ache in her chest no longer came from guilt. It came from the realization that with Lucky, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, safe. And that feeling, once faint and fleeting, had begun to grow. The bathroom light flickered again, casting uneven shadows across the tiled walls. Winter sat on the edge of the bathtub, her fingers tightly gripping the small plastic stick resting on the sink. She had read the instructions twice before taking the test, even though she already knew how it worked. It wasn't her first time, after all. But this time, her hands had trembled more, her chest felt tighter, and her mind spun with 1,000 possible outcomes. She stared at the test now, watching as the second line appeared, faint at first, then darker, undeniable. 2 lines. Pregnant. Her throat tightened. The air felt thick, almost unbreathable. She didn't cry. Her eyes were dry, wide, confused. Slowly, she leaned back, letting her head rest against the cool tiles, the stick still clutched in her hand like something sacred and dangerous all at once. The silence around her was deafening. A part of her wanted to scream, but another part, stronger, steadier, remained still. This wasn't the kind of news that brought excitement or tears of joy. It was the kind that came with a heavy pause, a slow sinking realization. She thought about the night it must have happened, the blurred lines of guilt and comfort, the aching loneliness that had brought her to that point. She hadn't planned it. She hadn't even thought about it afterward. There had been too much else to carry, her fractured marriage, her hidden anger, her quiet longing for peace. But now this life, growing quietly inside her, demanded attention. She touched her stomach absent-mindedly, unsure whether it was fear or protectiveness she felt more. She didn't think of Shadrach. She thought of Lucky, his sad eyes, the way he listened, how his presence had become a gentle place to land. She didn't know how he would react. She didn't even know what she wanted from him. All she knew was that her life had shifted again, and there was no going back. The following days moved slowly, each one filled with a mix of numbness and clarity. Winter went through her routines, school drop-offs, board meetings, weekly check-ins at the warehouse, but everything felt like she was watching herself from a distance. One evening, while clearing out old files in the study, she stumbled across Shadrach's tablet. He had carelessly left it unlocked. She almost ignored it. Almost. But something told her to look. And when she did, what she found wasn't a single message this time. It was a group chat with 3 of his close friends. The conversation was crude, laughing, too casual. Guy, that woman now you're jackpotto. You just day chop soft. Ego pain if she wise up one day. And then, from Shadrach himself, now why I still day there. Money steady day flow. You think say na love? The words blurred for a second before refocusing. Winter's body went still. This wasn't betrayal laced with charm. This was exploitation, cold and calculated. And just like that, the fragile string holding her to that marriage snapped completely. Not from anger, but from the firm knowing she was done. Not just with him, but with the version of herself that kept waiting for things to change. Winter didn't call her family right away. She needed time to breathe, to make sense of the weight she was carrying, both in her body and in her heart. The following weekend, she packed a small overnight bag and took her son to visit her parents in Victoria Island. It had been a while since she'd been there, and the moment she stepped through the gate, something inside her softened. Her mother, ever perceptive, noticed the shift in her eyes even before she spoke. Over dinner, in the comfort of home and warmth, Winter let the truth pour out, and not just about the messages or the group chat, but about how far gone she had been emotionally. She spoke slowly, carefully, pausing between words like they were fragile. Her father didn't interrupt once. Her mother's only response was to quietly reach across the table and place her hand over Winter's. That gentle grip told her everything. She wasn't alone anymore. When the conversation extended to Shadrach's family, Winter braced herself for resistance, for blame. But surprisingly, there was none. Shadrach's elder sister sighed deeply when she heard the details, and after a long pause, admitted she had her own suspicions. "We warned him, Winter. We told him to stop playing games with you. He never listened." His mother didn't speak much, but the shame on her face was unmistakable. That made it easier for Winter to say the words out loud. "I'm leaving him. Not maybe. Not if he changes." It was a declaration, one that rang in the silence like the closing of a heavy door. Her parents supported her without hesitation. "You've done more than enough," her mother said gently. "It's time to choose you." For the first time in years, Winter felt light, as though a burden she had carried for so long had finally begun to slide off her shoulders. The fear wasn't gone, but it no longer ruled her. When she returned home the next day, she waited until her son was asleep before asking Shadrach to come into the sitting room. He strolled in lazily, phone in hand, unaware of what was waiting for him. Winter stood in the center of the room, calm and composed, a printed copy of the group chat folded neatly on the coffee table. "We're done," she said softly. Shadrach looked up, confused, then scoffed. "Done with what?" She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She simply told him what she had seen, what she now knew, and what she had decided. When she mentioned the pregnancy, there was a flicker in his eyes, perhaps surprise, perhaps shame, but he didn't speak. She handed him the envelope of printed chats. He took it, scanned the top page, and sat down slowly, his face paling. "I didn't mean it like that," he mumbled. But she was already walking away. There was nothing more to discuss. By morning, he had packed his things. No dramatic exit, no pleading. Just silence and regret trailing behind him like an old, tired song. And for Winter, the quiet he left behind was the most peaceful sound she'd heard in years. The sky that morning was pale and undecided, as if unsure whether to welcome the sun or let the clouds remain. Winter sat in her car, parked a short walk from the gym, her fingers tapping gently on the steering wheel. She had rehearsed what she wanted to say over and over again the night before, but now, staring through the windshield at the modest building where so much of her healing had begun, her mind felt blank. She wasn't afraid of Lucky's reaction, not exactly. But this was a different kind of conversation. This wasn't about comfort or stolen moments of understanding. This was about truth, raw and unfiltered. She took a slow breath, placed her hand over her stomach without thinking, then reached for the door handle. Each step she took toward the entrance felt heavier than usual, not because of fear, but because of the vulnerability that was waiting on the other side. Lucky was at the far end of the gym, adjusting a stack of weights when she entered. His eyes met hers briefly, and he offered a small smile, but it faltered when he noticed her expression. "You okay?" he asked, stepping toward her with that familiar, steady tone. She nodded, then shook her head. "I need to talk to you," she said, motioning toward the back office. They sat across from each other in the cramped room that smelled faintly of rubber and lemon-scented cleaner. For a long moment she couldn't find the words. She looked at the floor, then back at him. "I'm pregnant," she said softly. The silence that followed was thick, not with discomfort, but with the weight of processing. Lucky didn't move, didn't speak. His brows lowered slightly, his lips parted, but he didn't look away. "It's mine?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Winter nodded. He leaned back, his hands clasped together tightly in front of him. And then, to her surprise, he smiled, small, almost uncertain, but real. "Okay," he said simply. "Then we figure this out together." His reaction unraveled something in her, something she hadn't realized she'd been bracing against. She blinked and covered her face with her hands, not crying, but overwhelmed by the relief she hadn't expected to feel. Lucky didn't rush her. He stayed seated, eyes on her, letting the silence settle without pressure. When she finally looked up, he reached across the table and took her hand, firm, warm, unshaking. "We'll take it one step at a time," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." There were no grand promises, no declarations of love, but there was something deeper in the way he spoke, assurance, responsibility, a quiet kind of strength. It wasn't just that he accepted the news, it was how he carried it, how he carried her. In that moment, Winter understood something she hadn't before. Love didn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it showed up like this, calm, steady, and exactly when you needed it most. The sun filtered through the half-drawn curtains of Winter's new home, casting soft gold across the living room rug. It wasn't the biggest place she'd ever lived, but it was hers, chosen, not inherited, and shaped with quiet intention. The couch cushions were mismatched, and the dining chairs didn't all look the same, but everything carried a kind of warmth. Her son sat cross-legged on the floor, drawing with crayons, humming a tune he'd picked up from school. In the kitchen, the scent of jollof rice simmering filled the air. Winter leaned against the doorway, hand resting just above her waist, where a gentle swell had begun to form. The pregnancy had changed her body more quickly this time, but instead of insecurity, she felt something else, pride. This life, this child had come out of something painful, yet here she was, standing, breathing, beginning again. Lucky arrived just before noon, balancing a bag of fruits in one hand and a box of prenatal vitamins in the other. He greeted her son first, knelt to his level, and ruffled his hair with familiarity. Then he met Winter's gaze, and something unspoken passed between them, a quiet affirmation that they were okay, that they were moving forward. They ate lunch as a trio, laughter rising naturally between bites, the awkwardness of the past fading gently into the background. Afterward, as her son napped, Winter and Lucky sat outside on the small balcony. The neighborhood was modest, the sounds of traffic and nearby voices drifting up from the street. Lucky spoke about his plans, maybe renting a bigger space for his gym someday, maybe hiring help. Winter listened, her hand in his, heart strangely at peace. She didn't know what the future held, but she no longer feared it. The worst had already happened, and yet she was still here. Later that evening, as the sky turned dusky and the streetlights blinked on one by one, Winter stood alone at the balcony rail, watching the world settle into itself. She thought of everything she had left behind, the cold silences, the subtle humiliations, the years of bending herself to fit a man's emptiness. And then she thought of where she was now, how far she had come. She hadn't just escaped a toxic marriage, she had reclaimed her name, her body, her voice. The baby kicked softly, as if in response, and she smiled. Inside, Lucky was helping her son organize his toy shelf. Their laughter echoed faintly like music through the walls. Winter took one last look at the street below, then turned back toward the life she had built, messy, unfinished, but honest. In that quiet, ordinary moment, she finally understood peace doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it slips in quietly, through the cracks, and sits down beside you like it was always meant to be there. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.